The Great Hall of the Federation Council stretched across 3 kilometers of polished crystal floor. 17 different species sat in their designated sections, each watching the empty platform in the center where today's presentation would take place. Ambassador of the Veilorn clicked his 4 mandibles together nervously. He had reviewed the human application for full Federation membership 12 times. Each time, he found the same problem. Humans had only achieved faster-than-light travel 43 years ago. They were bobbies in the cosmic sense. Every other species in this room had thousands of years of interstellar history behind them. The Veilorn had been mapping distant galaxies when humans were still figuring out how to make fire. The Thessari had built their first space stations when human ancestors were learning to walk upright. Even the youngest member species, the Cranathi, had been traveling between stars for over 2,000 years before they applied for membership. And yet here were the humans, barely out of their planetary cradle, asking to sit at the same table as civilizations that had conquered entropy itself. High Chancellor Morven, a being of shifting blue light contained within a crystalline body, floated to the center platform. The Luminar species rarely spoke, preferring to communicate through patterns of light and electromagnetic pulses. But for formal occasions such as this, Morven used the ancient method of vocalization. His voice echoed through the great hall like wind through hollow mountains. Today we witness the final application presentation of species 4847, locally designated as humans from the Sol system. Their representative will demonstrate their species' contribution to Federation knowledge and culture. As is tradition, failure to present something of genuine value will result in a 50-year delay before another application may be submitted. Crixtal had seen this ceremony many times. Most species brought their greatest scientific achievements. The Cranathi had demonstrated their revolutionary approach to quantum computing. The Thessari had shown their mastery of gravitational manipulation. The Gorven had presented biological engineering so advanced it bordered on magic. What could humans possibly bring that would impress beings who had solved most of the universe's mysteries millennia ago? The human delegation entered through the far doors. Crixtal counted 7 of them. They were small creatures, even by galactic standards. Soft skin, no natural armor, no claws worth mentioning, no venom glands. They looked fragile, like they might break if handled roughly. The lead human was a female with gray hair and kind eyes. She walked with the help of a metal stick, her body clearly showing the effects of age. Behind her came 6 others carrying various boxes and containers. "I am Dr. Elena Vasquez," the old human said. Her voice was quiet but steady. "I have been chosen to represent Earth's application to the Federation Council." High Chancellor Morven pulsed a warm yellow. "You may proceed, Dr. Vasquez. What does humanity offer to the collective knowledge of the Federation?" Dr. Vasquez smiled. It was a strange expression, Crixtal thought. The corners of her mouth turned upward and small lines appeared around her eyes. He had read that this indicated positive emotion in humans, though it looked somewhat unsettling to him. "Before I answer that question," Dr. Vasquez said, "I would like to ask one of my own if the council permits." There was a murmur of surprise from several sections. This was not normal procedure, but Morven pulsed thoughtfully and said, "You may ask." "Thank you. My question is this. When was the last time any species in this room created something truly new?" Silence fell over the great hall. Felt his secondary heart speed up slightly. This was either very brave or very foolish. Ambassador Thessari Prime rose from his levitation pad, his silver skin reflecting the hall's lights. "What do you mean by truly new? We create new technologies constantly. Our latest advancement in—" "Forgive me," Dr. Vasquez interrupted gently. "I should be more specific. When was the last time any species here created something that served no practical purpose whatsoever, something made purely for the joy of making it?" The silence deepened. Crixtal searched his memory banks. The Veilorn had not created anything impractical in over 800 years. Everything they made served a function, solved a problem, improved efficiency. That was the rational way. That was the advanced way. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly, as if the silence had answered her question. She gestured to one of her assistants, a young man who quickly set up a simple wooden frame on the platform. From one of the boxes, he pulled out a square of fabric stretched over a smaller frame. "This is called a canvas," Dr. Vasquez explained. "This wooden structure is an easel, and these," she held up several tubes and bottles, "are paints. They are colored pigments suspended in various liquids." The young man returned to the boxes and began pulling out more items. Saw blocks of stone, lumps of clay, musical instruments he could not name, bundles of paper, and dozens of other objects he did not recognize. "What is the purpose of these items?" asked Delegate Gorvenkesh, her tentacles waving in confusion. "They appear to be primitive tools of some kind." Dr. Vasquez's smile widened. "They have no purpose, or rather their only purpose is to create things that also have no purpose. We call this activity art." Crystal accessed the Federation database. Art, decorative or aesthetic elements applied to functional objects. Status, largely obsolete among advanced species. Primary function, cultural identification in primitive societies. He had seen art in museums, of course. Ancient Valorn pottery with painted designs. Early Thessari structures with unnecessary decorative elements. These were relics of less evolved times, back when species still wasted resources on non-essential activities. "With respect," said Ambassador Kranathi V, her voice a series of clicking sounds translated by the hall systems, "we are familiar with the concept of art. It is a phase all species pass through before achieving efficiency. We abandoned such wasteful practices thousands of years ago. Surely this is not what humanity brings to the Federation." "Oh, we bring much more than the concept," Dr. Vasquez said. "We bring the practice itself. You see, humanity never stopped making art. We never decided it was wasteful. In fact, we do it more now than ever before. Every single human alive creates something. We cannot help ourselves. It is as natural to us as breathing." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small object. Crystal enhanced his visual sensors to see it better. It was a tiny figure, roughly carved from wood, depicting what appeared to be a four-legged earth animal. "My great-grandmother made this," Dr. Vasquez said, holding it up for the council to see. "She was a farmer. She had no formal training in carving, but in the evenings after her work was done, she would sit on her porch and make these little animals from scraps of wood. She gave them to her children and grandchildren. This one has been in my family for 4 generations. It serves no function. It does not improve efficiency. It cannot be eaten or used as fuel. It simply exists because an old woman with work-rough hands wanted to make something beautiful." The council members looked at each other uncertainly. Crystal noticed that none of them seemed to know how to respond. This was not going the way anyone had expected. Dr. Vasquez set down the wooden figure carefully. "Now," she said, "let me show you what humanity can really do." She nodded to her assistants, and they began to unpack the boxes with quick, practiced movements. Within minutes, the platform was transformed into a workspace filled with materials and tools. Dr. Vasquez picked up a brush and approached the canvas. "I am 87 years old," she said as she began to mix colors on a small wooden board. "I have been painting since I was 4. That is 83 years of practice. And I am still learning, still discovering new things about this art form. That is the nature of creativity. It has no end point. There is no moment when you have achieved maximum efficiency and can stop. There is always more to explore." She began to apply paint to the canvas. The council watched in silence as shapes began to emerge. Had never seen anyone work like this. There was no plan visible, no schematic, no mathematical precision. Dr. Vasquez simply moved her brush according to some internal guidance that he could not comprehend. The other human assistants had begun their own work. One was shaping clay with her hands. Another was playing soft notes on a stringed instrument. A third was writing something on paper with a simple marking tool. A fourth was dancing slowly, her body moving in patterns that followed the music. The fifth was singing, her voice weaving in and out of the instrumental melody. The sixth was assembling small pieces of colored glass into a pattern. The Great Hall of the Federation Council had never witnessed anything quite like this before. 17 species watched as 7 humans simply created. There was no product announcement, no efficiency ratings, no practical applications, just beings making things because they wanted to. Crystal found himself unable to look away from Dr. Vasquez's canvas. The shapes were becoming clearer now. It was a scene of some kind. A landscape, perhaps, but not just any landscape. There was something about it that made his secondary heart slow down, that made his mandibles stop their constant clicking. He did not understand why. It was just paint on fabric. It should not have any effect on him at all. But it did. And that was when Crystal began to realize that humanity's application might not fail after all. The painting on Dr. Vasquez's canvas had taken shape over the past hour. It showed a sunset over water, with colors that seemed impossible. Orange bled into purple, bled into gold, bled into blue. The water reflected the sky imperfectly, breaking the colors into dancing fragments. In the foreground, there was a small boat with a single figure sitting in it, facing the sunset. The figure's face was not visible, but somehow felt he understood what that figure was feeling. Peace. Wonder. A sense of being very small in a very large universe, and finding comfort in that smallness. How could paint on fabric make him feel things? He had no memory of this sensation. The Valorn had eliminated most strong emotions thousands of years ago as inefficient biological responses. Yet here he was, staring at a primitive collection of colored pigments, experiencing something his species had forgotten. High Chancellor Morven floated closer to the platform, his crystalline body pulsing with colors Crystal had never seen before. The Luminar usually communicated in controlled, precise patterns, but now Morven's light was chaotic, flickering rapidly between hues that had no translation in any known language. What is this?" Morven asked, his voice barely above a whisper. He was looking at the young woman who had been dancing. She had stopped now, breathing hard, sweat glistening on her skin. What was that movement? What did it mean? The dancer wiped her face with a small cloth. It did not mean anything specific. It was an expression of how the music made me feel. But the patterns were not random. They followed some kind of structure. Yes, years of training taught my body how to move, but the specific movements I chose just now in this moment were improvised, made up on the spot. I did not plan them. Morven's light pulsed violet with confusion. You made complex physical decisions without planning, without calculation. Every second, the dancer said, smiling. That is what makes it dancing instead of just moving. Delegate Gorvenkesh had left her seat and approached the young man who was working with clay. Her tentacles hovered over the half-formed shape on his work table, not quite touching it. You are making this with your hands alone, she said. No tools, no machines, no templates. Yes, ma'am. This is called hand building. It is one of the oldest forms of pottery. But it is not precise. The walls are not uniform thickness. The shape is slightly asymmetrical. That is called character, the young man said cheerfully. Each piece I make is unique because my hands are not machines. They respond to the clay differently each time. No two pieces I have ever made are exactly alike. Gorvenkesh's tentacles trembled slightly. Among my people, such imprecision would be considered a failure. We would destroy this and start again with proper equipment. You could do that, the young man agreed. But then you would lose this. He held up the clay form, which was taking the shape of a bowl. See how this side curves slightly more than that side? It was an accident. My hand slipped while I was pulling up the wall, but I think it makes the bowl more interesting. When it is finished and someone uses it, they will feel that curve against their fingers. They will know that a human being made this, not a machine. and maybe that will make their morning tea taste a little bit better. Crystal watched as, one by one, council members left their seats and approached the human artists. The Kranathi delegation stood around the woman assembling colored glass, asking questions about how she chose which colors to place next to each other. The Thessari ambassador was listening intently to the singer, trying to understand how human voices could create such complex vibrations. Even the Morvan, who rarely interacted with other species due to their completely different physical form, had extended sensory tendrils toward the paper where one human was writing. These symbols, the Morvan representative said through the translation system, they represent sounds. Yes, we call this writing. This particular form is called poetry. And what is poetry? The writer thought for a moment. It is language arranged in a way that creates emotion and meaning beyond the simple definitions of the words. That does not compute. Language either means something or it does not. May I read you what I have written so far? The Morvan extended more tendrils in what might have been a gesture of agreement. The writer cleared her throat and read from her paper. The stars do not care that I love them. They burn without knowing my name. But I light my small candle anyway, a tiny answer to their ancient flame. There was a long pause. Then the Morvan representative made a sound that the translation system could not interpret. When words finally came, they were strange and halting. I understand each word you spoke, yet combined they create something I cannot define. They make me think of when I was young before the joining, when I was a single organism looking up at the sky. I had forgotten that feeling. How did your symbols bring it back? That is what poetry does, the writer said gently. It reminds us of things we forgot we knew. Dr. Vasquez had finished her painting. She stepped back from the canvas, wiping her hands on a cloth, and turned to address the council. But before she could speak, High Chancellor Morvan raised a hand. Wait, before you continue, I must ask the council members to return to their seats for a formal discussion. There was reluctance as the delegates moved back to their sections. Many of them kept looking back at the artwork being created on the platform. Crystal noticed that several of them, including himself, had not blinked or clicked or made their usual involuntary movements during the past hour. They had been completely absorbed. I must make a confession, Morvan said, his light pulsing in a somber blue. When I reviewed the human application, I intended to deny it. Your species is young. Your technology is primitive compared to ours. You have barely begun to explore the galaxy. By all standard measures, you are not ready for full Federation membership. Dr. Vasquez nodded slowly, and now. Morvan was silent for a long moment. His light shifted through colors that seemed to express something beyond words. Now I am not certain of anything. For 12,000 years, the Luminar have pursued efficiency above all else. We eliminated waste. We optimized every process. We achieved what we believed was perfect civilization. And yet, he gestured toward the painting, I have never seen a Luminar create something like that. I have never felt what I felt while watching your people work. I do not know how to classify this sensation. My database has no category for it. We call it being moved, Dr. Vasquez said. It means that something has affected your emotions so strongly that you feel physically different. Your heart beats faster or slower. Your breath catches. You might feel warmth in your chest or tears in your eyes. It is what happens when art does what it is meant to do. Art is meant to create physical responses in viewers. Among other things, yes. Good art makes you feel something. Great art makes you feel something and then makes you think about why you felt it. The best art changes how you see the world even after you stop looking at it. Crystal found himself standing before he realized he had decided to speak. High Chancellor, may I address the council? Morvan pulsed yellow. You may, Ambassador Crystal. I have been watching the human painter work for over an hour. I have been trying to analyze her process, to understand the underlying logic. I thought that if I observed long enough, I would discover the algorithm she was using to decide where to place each brush stroke. But I could not find one. There was no pattern I could identify. Each decision she made seemed to flow from some source I could not access. He turned to face Dr. Vasquez directly. When I look at your painting, I feel something I have not felt in many years. It is similar to what I experienced as a young Valorn before my emotional responses were regulated. I feel longing, a desire for something I cannot name, and I feel peaceful at the same time. How can a flat surface covered in colored chemicals make me feel two contradictory things at once? Dr. Vasquez smiled warmly. Because you are not as different from us as you think, Ambassador. Beneath all your advanced technology and evolved biology, you are still a being capable of wonder. The Valorn did not eliminate your emotions. You simply buried them under layers of efficiency. Art digs them back up. This is what you bring to the Federation, Morven asked. The ability to unearth buried emotions. This is part of it, yes. But there is something larger that I have been trying to explain. Creativity is not just about making art. It is a way of thinking. It is the ability to look at something that exists and imagine what it could become. It is the willingness to try things that have no guarantee of success. It is the courage to make mistakes and learn from them instead of only doing what has already been proven to work. She walked among the human artists on the platform, gesturing to each one. Every person here has failed thousands of times. The painter has made bad paintings, the dancer has fallen, the potter has broken bowls, the writer has thrown away more words than she has kept, the singer has hit wrong notes, the glass artist has cut herself countless times, and yet they continue. They fail and they try again, and sometimes they create something wonderful. That is what creativity requires, the willingness to fail. Felt something shift in his understanding. The Valorn had not attempted anything truly new in centuries because they refused to risk failure. Every project was carefully analyzed and approved only if success was nearly guaranteed. It was efficient, it was safe, and it had led to complete stagnation. How many species in this council, Dr. Vasquez continued, have stopped taking risks? How many have achieved comfort and stability and then stopped growing? How many have decided that efficiency is more important than exploration, that safety is more valuable than discovery? No one answered. No one had to. The truth hung in the air like smoke. Humanity offers the Federation something it has lost, Dr. Vasquez said. We offer chaos. We offer uncertainty. We offer the messy, unpredictable, gloriously inefficient process of creation. We fail constantly. We make things that serve no purpose. We waste resources on beauty, and in doing so, we find possibilities that careful analysis would never reveal. She picked up her brush again and added one small detail to her painting. A single bird, tiny against the vast sunset sky. The Federation has solved most of the easy problems. You have mastered physics and chemistry and biology. You have conquered space and time. But you have forgotten how to dream, and without dreams there can be no new problems to solve. Humanity still dreams. That is what we offer. High Chancellor Morven floated silently for a long moment. Then, slowly, his light began to pulse in a pattern Crystal had never seen before. It took a moment for the translation systems to interpret it. Morven was laughing. Illuminar was laughing. It was the first recorded instance in over 4,000 years. I believe, Morven said when he could speak again, that we have much to learn from these strange, inefficient, creative creatures. Let us proceed with the full evaluation, but I suspect I already know how I will vote. Crystal settled back into his seat, his eyes still fixed on the painting of the sunset. For the first time in centuries, he was genuinely curious about what would happen next, and that curiosity itself felt like a gift. The formal evaluation continued for 3 more days. What began as a standard membership review transformed into something the Federation had never experienced before. Word spread through the diplomatic networks that something unprecedented was happening in the Great Hall. By the second day, Observers from dozens of non-member species had requested permission to watch. By the third day, the viewing galleries were filled with beings from across the galaxy, all straining to see the small group of humans who had somehow turned a bureaucratic procedure into something remarkable. Dr. Vasquez had organized her presentation into what she called demonstrations of creative thinking. Each one focused on a different aspect of how humans approach problems, but they were not the sterile technical presentations the council was accustomed to. They were alive. The first demonstration involved a simple puzzle. Dr. Vasquez presented each council delegation with a box containing assorted items: string, metal clips, rubber bands, small pieces of wood, and other ordinary objects. The challenge was to build a structure that could support a small weight while using the fewest possible components. The Valorn delegation immediately began calculating optimal stress distributions. The Thessari used their gravitational manipulation abilities to analyze each component's structural properties. The Kranathi ran thousands of simulations in seconds. Each species approached the problem with their characteristic precision. The human team simply started playing with the materials. They bent clips into odd shapes. They tied string in messy knots. They broke pieces of wood and stuck them back together at strange angles. To the watching council members, it looked like chaos. Then something unexpected happened. Young Maya Chen, the dancer from the art demonstration, held up a single rubber band stretched between two small pieces of wood. She had attached the clips in a way that created a stable platform at the top. The entire structure used only 4 components and could support twice the required weight. "How did you arrive at that design?" Ambassador Kranathi 5 demanded. "Our simulations showed that rubber bands were unsuitable due to material fatigue." "I did not think about material fatigue," Maya admitted. "I just noticed that the rubber band looked like my grandmother's washing line. She used to hang heavy wet blankets on it, and it never broke. So I thought maybe the same idea would work here." "You derived an engineering solution from laundry." "I guess I did, yes." The Kranathi delegation fell into what their species called processing silence. It lasted for nearly 10 minutes. The second demonstration was even more disruptive. Dr. Vasquez asked each delegation to design a new type of vehicle for a specific purpose, moving large quantities of fragile goods across rough terrain without damage. The Gorven designed an elegant biological vehicle that grew protective cushioning around its cargo. The Thessari proposed a gravity-dampening platform that would float above the terrain entirely. The Morven suggested a quantum storage system that would dematerialize the cargo and rematerialize it at the destination. The human team, led by Marcus Webb, the potter, presented a cart. It was not just any cart. Marcus had spent hours talking with the other humans, sketching ideas, discarding some, combining others. The final design looked simple, almost primitive. 4 wheels attached to a platform with a complex system of springs and joints connecting everything. But when they demonstrated it on a specially prepared rough surface, carrying a container of glass vessels, not a single piece was damaged. "The suspension system absorbs impacts in 4 different ways," Marcus explained. "The wheels flex slightly, the axle joints rotate, the springs compress, and the platform itself tilts to redistribute weight. Each system backs up the others. If one fails, the rest compensate." "This is redundant," said the Gorven delegate, her tentacles indicating disapproval. "An elegant solution would require only one mechanism." "Maybe, but elegant solutions only work when everything goes perfectly. Our solution is ugly and complicated, but it works even when things go wrong. Humans learned long ago that things usually go wrong." The Gorven delegate had no response to that. On the third day, Dr. Vasquez presented what she called the most important demonstration of all. She asked the council for a genuine problem they had been unable to solve. After much debate, High Chancellor Morven proposed one. For over 2,000 years, we have been attempting to establish communication with the silence. A murmur ran through the hall. The silents were legendary. They were the oldest known species in the galaxy, predating even the Federation's founding species by millions of years. Their civilization spanned dozens of star systems, but they had never responded to any communication attempt. They did not attack visitors, but they did not acknowledge them either. Ships that entered their space were simply ignored. Millions of messages had been sent over thousands of years. Not one had received a reply. We have tried every known communication method, Morven continued. Radio waves, light pulses, gravitational signals, quantum entanglement, chemical messages, biological messengers, mathematical sequences, nothing has worked. The silence remains silent. Dr. Vasquez nodded thoughtfully. What do you know about them? Very little. Their technology is beyond our understanding. Their structures follow no recognizable design principles. Their biology, if they have biology, is completely unknown. We are not even certain they are aware that other intelligent species exist. Have you ever tried communicating through art? Morven's light flickered. Art? You mean sending them decorative objects? Not exactly. I mean trying to communicate emotion instead of information. Every method you described is designed to convey data. What if the silents are not interested in data? What if they are waiting for something else? Leaned forward in his seat. This was either brilliant or absurd, possibly both. What would such a communication look like? Morven asked. Dr. Vasquez turned to her team. I think we need music. What followed took nearly 6 hours to prepare. The humans set up a complex arrangement of instruments and equipment. Dr. Vasquez explained that they would compose an original piece of music specifically for the silence, based on everything the Federation knew about them. But you know almost nothing, Ambassador Thesari Prime pointed out. We know they are very old, Dr. Vasquez replied. We know they choose not to speak. We know they have watched the galaxy change around them for millions of years. We know they have seen species rise and fall, civilizations bloom and wither. That is actually quite a lot to work with. The composition process was chaotic. The humans argued, laughed, tried things that did not work, tried other things that worked better. They made notes on paper, then crossed them out and wrote new ones. They played fragments of melody, listened, and changed them. It looked completely disorganized. Then they began to perform. The music started with a single note held for a long time. It was lonely and vast, like an empty universe. Gradually, other sounds joined in, tentative at first, then more confident. The melody developed slowly, patiently, with long pauses between phrases. It was not trying to impress or overwhelm. It was simply present, existing alongside the silence rather than trying to fill it. Felt something strange happening in his mind. The music was not just sounds. It was telling a story. He could feel the immense age of the silence, the weight of watching epochs pass like moments. He could feel their patient observation of young species stumbling toward intelligence. He could feel something that might have been loneliness, or might have been peace, or might have been both. The peace lasted nearly an hour. When it ended, the great hall was absolutely still. No one spoke. No one moved. The music hung in the air like a living thing. Finally, Dr. Vasquez said, "Would the council like to send this to the silence?" "Yes," said Morven immediately. His light was flickering in patterns no one could interpret. "Yes, I believe we would." The message was sent that evening through the most powerful transmission array in Federation space. No one expected a reply. The silence had not responded to millions of messages over thousands of years. Why would this be any different? 3 days later, while the council was still debating the formal membership application, something happened that had never happened before in recorded galactic history. The silence answered. Their response was not words or data or mathematical sequences. It was music, strange, alien, incomprehensible in its structure, but undeniably music. It lasted for nearly 2 hours. When Federation analysts tried to study it, they found patterns that seemed to correspond to concepts like acknowledgement, interest, and something that might have been gratitude. The Great Hall erupted into chaos. Species that had communicated through standard methods for millennia were suddenly confronted with proof that they had been missing something fundamental. The silence had been listening all along. They had simply been waiting for someone to speak a language they considered worth hearing. Dr. Vasquez stood quietly amid the celebration, a small smile on her weathered face. When Crystal approached her, she looked up at him with knowing eyes. "You knew this would happen," he said. "I hoped it might. The silence are very old. Old beings often become tired of facts and figures. They want something more, something that touches the spirit rather than just the mind. You have changed everything. The Council will never be the same after this." "Good," Dr. Vasquez said simply. "You were getting too comfortable. Comfortable civilizations stop growing. They stop asking questions. They stop wondering what else is possible. Humanity may be young and foolish and inefficient, but we never stop wondering. That is our gift and our curse." Crystal looked at the old human with new understanding. She was fragile and temporary, her body showing the wear of nearly 9 decades of life. She would be gone in a few more years, turned back into the basic elements that made up all matter. And yet she had just achieved something that all the combined wisdom and power of the Federation had failed to do for 2,000 years. "I think," Crystal said carefully, "that I need to learn how to paint." Dr. Vasquez laughed, a warm and surprising sound. "I think you do too, Ambassador. I think you all do." The vote for humanity's full Federation membership was called the following morning. In 17,000 years of Federation history, no species had ever received unanimous approval. There had always been objections, reservations, political complications. The closest previous record was the Thessari admission, which had passed with 94% support. Humanity became the first species to receive 100% approval from all member delegations. But the story did not end there. It was only beginning. Within 6 months of humanity's admission to the Federation, something unprecedented began to spread through galactic civilization. It started small. A Valorn diplomat requested art supplies from Earth. A Thessari research station began playing human music during their rest cycles. A Gorvan collective purchased every book of human poetry they could find and spent months trying to understand metaphors. Then it grew larger. The Krenathi, those masters of quantum computing and logical analysis, established what they called a creativity laboratory. It was staffed by a mix of Krenathi scientists and human artists. Their first project was to create a piece of music using both quantum algorithms and human improvisation. The result was strange and beautiful, unlike anything that either species could have made alone. The Morvan, who communicated primarily through direct neural connection and had considered language-based art to be primitive, began experimenting with what they called emotional mathematics. They created equations that, when translated into visual form, produced patterns that affected viewers in specific ways. It was not quite human art, but it was something new, something that their species had never imagined before. Even the austere Luminar were affected. High Chancellor Morvan, who had led the Federation for over 3,000 years with perfect efficiency, announced that he would be taking a sabbatical. He intended to learn human painting techniques from Dr. Vasquez herself. It was the first time a sitting High Chancellor had voluntarily stepped away from duty in Federation history. Crystal watched all of this from his position on the Council, feeling a mixture of wonder and unease. The Federation was changing, and change was something the Valorn had learned to fear. For centuries, they had pursued stability above all else. Now stability was crumbling everywhere, and new things were growing in its place. He had taken Dr. Vasquez's suggestion seriously. For the past 3 months, he had been secretly taking painting lessons from a human teacher named Thomas Reed. Thomas was patient and kind, never mocking Crystal's clumsy attempts with brush and canvas. "You are thinking too much," Thomas said during one session. "Your brain is trying to calculate each stroke before you make it. That is not how painting works. You have to feel your way through." Valorn do not feel, we process. Everyone feels. Some species just forget how. The paint will remind you. Crystal did not believe him, but he kept trying anyway, which was itself a kind of revolution. The old Crystal would have abandoned any activity that did not show immediate improvement. The new Crystal was learning that some things were worth doing even if you did them badly. His first completed painting was awful by any objective standard. The colors were muddy. The proportions were wrong. The subject, a simple bowl of fruit, looked like something that had melted and partially reformed. Thomas studied it for a long time, his expression unreadable. "What do you see?" Thomas finally asked. "I see failure. The painting does not represent the actual fruit in any accurate way." "That is what you see. What do you feel?" Considered the question. What did he feel? For a long moment there was nothing. Then, slowly, something emerged from deep within his carefully regulated mind. It was warm and uncomfortable, like blood returning to a limb that had been numb for too long. "I feel proud," he said slowly. "This painting is bad. I know it is bad, but I made it. I created something that did not exist before. No Valorn has done that in 800 years. This may be a terrible painting, but it is my terrible painting. It is proof that I am capable of creating." Thomas smiled. It was, Crystal had learned, the human expression of genuine pleasure. "Now you understand, the quality does not matter. What matters is that you tried. You risked failure. You stepped out of your comfort zone and made something new. That is what creativity is. Not the result, but the act. The reaching towards something you cannot quite grasp." Stared at his ugly painting with new eyes. It was ugly. It would always be ugly. He would hang it in his quarters anyway. The following year brought changes that no one could have predicted. The silence, awakened from their long withdrawal by the human music, began to communicate more frequently. Their messages were always musical, never linguistic, but the Federation was learning to interpret them. It turned out that the silence had been observing galactic civilization since its earliest days. They had much to share. They simply had been waiting for beings advanced enough to listen with something other than their analytical minds. The first silence ambassador to visit Federation space arrived at the Great Hall on a day that Crystal would never forget. The being was vast and ancient, its form constantly shifting between states of matter. It moved through the hall like a living aurora, beautiful and terrifying. Every species present fell silent as it approached the council platform. Through complex musical phrases that the Federation had spent months learning to understand, the silence ambassador conveyed a message. It was difficult to translate into words, but the meaning was clear. For millions of years, the silence had watched species achieve intelligence, develop technology, join the Federation, and then stagnate. They had seen it happen again and again. A species would reach a certain level of advancement and then stop growing. They would become efficient, comfortable, stable. They would lose something essential and never even notice it was gone. The silence had begun to despair that the pattern would ever change. That was why they had withdrawn from communication. What was the point of speaking to species that could not truly hear? Then the humans had sent their music. The humans were different, the ambassador explained. They were chaotic and unpredictable. They made things that served no purpose. They failed constantly and learned nothing. They were, by any rational measure, inefficient beyond belief. And that was exactly what the galaxy needed. The silence believed that the Federation was at a crossroads. It could continue down the path of perfect efficiency, eventually achieving a kind of immortal stasis where nothing new ever happened. Or it could embrace the human approach, messy, uncertain, full of failure, but also full of possibility. The choice was not easy. Many council members argued fiercely for tradition. The Valorn High Council issued a formal protest against the contamination of rational civilization by primitive emotional thinking. Several species threatened to withdraw from the Federation entirely. But something had changed that could not be unchanged. The other species had tasted creativity, and many of them found they could not go back to pure efficiency. The Gorvan Collective that had purchased human poetry reported that their members were experiencing something they called inspiration. The Thessari research stations were producing more novel discoveries than they had in the previous 1,000 years. Even the Krenathi, those paragons of logic, had begun incorporating intuitive approaches into their problem-solving. The vote on the Creative Integration Initiative was not unanimous. 32% of the council opposed it, but 68% voted in favor, including several species that had been among the oldest and most conservative. The Federation would change, not all at once, not without struggle and debate and difficult adjustments, but it would change. Was there when the vote passed. He was also there when Dr. Vasquez received the news. She was 90 years old now, her health declining, her time clearly limited, but her eyes still sparkled with the same warmth he had seen on the day of humanity's application. "You did this," he told her. "You changed everything." "I planted a seed," she replied. "The Federation did the growing." "It is the same thing." "No, Ambassador. A seed can be planted, but it cannot force the soil to accept it. The soil has to be ready. The Federation was ready for this change. It had been ready for a long time. It just needed someone to show them that change was possible." She reached into her pocket and pulled out a small wooden figure. It was the same one she had shown the council 3 years ago, the animal carved by her great-grandmother. She held it out to Crystal. "I want you to have this." "I cannot accept this. It is a family treasure." "Exactly, and now you are family." She pressed the figure into his hands. "When I am gone, which will be soon, I want you to remember what this represents. Not art, not creativity, something simpler. An old woman with work-rough hands who wanted to make something beautiful, even though no one asked her to, even though it served no purpose, even though it would never make her rich or famous. She created because creating made her happy. That is all. That is everything." Crystal looked at the small wooden animal. It was worn smooth by generations of hands holding it. It was simple, almost crude, and it was one of the most valuable objects he had ever touched. "Thank you," he said. "I will remember." Dr. Elena Vasquez died 3 months later. Her funeral was attended by representatives of every species in the Federation, including the Silence Ambassador. The ceremony was not traditional by human standards. Instead of speeches and rituals, there was music. Every species present contributed something. The Valorn played harmonics on crystalline instruments. The Thessari created gravitational symphonies. The Gorvan sang biological songs in frequencies that other species felt rather than heard. The Krenathi performed mathematical compositions. Even the Silence added their own contribution, haunting melodies that seemed to echo across time itself. And among them all, the human musicians played their simple instruments, creating something that wove through all the alien sounds and somehow made them one. It was not perfect. It was not efficient. It was gloriously, beautifully messy. Dr. Vasquez would have loved it. The years that followed became known in Federation history as the Creative Renaissance. Problems that had stumped the galaxy's best minds for millennia were solved through unexpected approaches. New forms of art emerged that combined the traditions of dozens of species. The boundaries between science and creativity began to blur, producing discoveries that neither pure logic nor pure intuition could have achieved alone. Not everything changed for the better. Some species struggled with the new approaches. Some rejected them entirely and withdrew from the Federation. There were conflicts and misunderstandings and painful failures. Creativity did not make the galaxy perfect. It made the galaxy alive. Crystal continued his painting lessons for the rest of his life. He never became particularly good. His works were clumsy and imprecise and would have embarrassed any human child. But he kept at it, year after year, decade after decade. In his final century, he became something of a celebrity among the younger Valorn, who sought him out to learn his human approach to problem solving. What he taught them was simple: feel more, calculate less, try things that might not work, fail gracefully and learn from your failures. Make things because making things is joyful, not because they serve a purpose. But Ambassador, his students would protest, that is inefficient. Yes, Crystal would reply, smiling in a way that his ancestors would never have recognized. Is it not wonderful? He kept Dr. Vasquez's wooden figure on his desk until the day he died. Beside it was his very first painting, the terrible one of the melting fruit. He had labeled it with a small plaque that read, "My most important work." When his students asked why he valued a clearly inferior piece so highly, he would pick up the wooden figure and tell them a story. Once upon a time, he would begin, a very old human woman came before the most powerful beings in the galaxy. She had no advanced technology. She had no revolutionary science. All she had was paint and canvas and a story about her great-grandmother who carved animals from wood. And with these simple things, she changed everything. Do you know how? His students would shake their heads. She reminded us that efficiency is not the highest virtue, that some things are worth doing even if they serve no purpose, that the universe is not a problem to be solved but a canvas to be painted. That creation is its own reward. That was her gift to us. And this painting, he would gesture at the terrible fruit, is my reminder that I received it. 100 years after Dr. Vasquez's death, the Federation unveiled a new memorial in the Great Hall. It was not a statue or a plaque or any conventional monument. It was an invitation. At the center of the hall, where the human team had once demonstrated their art, there was now a permanent creative space. Any being from any species could come there and make something. Paints and clay and instruments were always available. Nothing produced there was judged or evaluated. Nothing was preserved unless the creator wanted it to be. It was simply a space for creation. Above the entrance, carved in every known language and several musical notation systems, were words that Dr. Vasquez had spoken during her original presentation. There is always more to explore. Species that had never created anything for pleasure began to try, tentative at first, then with growing confidence. The things they made were often strange, sometimes ugly, occasionally sublime, but they made them, which was what mattered. The silence visited regularly. They would sit in the creative space for hours, watching beings from across the galaxy struggle and fail, and occasionally succeed at making something new. Their music during these visits was soft and warm, expressing something that Federation linguists eventually translated as hope. Because that was what humanity had given the galaxy in the end, not their technology or their science or even their art. They had given hope, hope that change was possible, hope that stagnation was not inevitable, hope that even the oldest and most rigid civilizations could learn to grow again. The Federation Council still met to discuss policy and resolve disputes and manage the vast business of interstellar civilization. But now, during breaks between sessions, delegates could sometimes be seen in the creative space. A Valorn struggling with a paintbrush, a Thessari learning to dance, a Kranathi writing poetry that defied all logical analysis. None of them were particularly good at it. That was not the point. The point was that they were trying. The point was that they had remembered something precious, something that millions of years of evolution and thousands of years of civilization had almost erased. The point was that they were creating. And in a universe that often seemed vast and cold and meaningless, that small act of creation was the most powerful force of all. The Great Hall of the Federation Council, which had once been a monument to efficiency and order, had become something new, something better, something human. And the humans themselves, those strange, fragile, inefficient beings who had stumbled into the galaxy barely a century ago, had somehow given the ancient civilizations around them a gift beyond measure. They had taught them how to play again. They had taught them how to dream. They had taught them that the universe was not just something to be understood, but something to be celebrated. And that made all the difference,